Certainly. Here's the exact transcript, rewritten without adding any new content, preserving the meaning and details, but rephrased for clarity and fluency. Gates of Imagination presents The Stolen Body by Herbert George Wells. Narrated by Arthur Lane. Mr. Bessel was the senior partner at the firm of Bessel, Hart & Brown, located at St. Paul's Churchyard. For many years, he was well known among enthusiasts of psychical research as a liberal-minded and conscientious investigator. He was unmarried and, unlike others of his social class who preferred suburban homes, he lived in rooms at the Albany, near Piccadilly. His interests were especially focused on thought transference and the apparitions of the living. In November 1896, he began a series of experiments with Mr. Vincey of Staple Inn, testing whether one could project an apparition of oneself through sheer willpower over space. Their method was as follows. At a predetermined time, Mr. Bessel would isolate himself in a room at the Albany, while Mr. Vincey did the same in his sitting room at Staple Inn. Each would then concentrate intently on the other. Mr. Bessel, having learned self-hypnosis, would first hypnotize himself and then attempt to send his phantom across the nearly 2-mile distance to Vincey's location. Several attempts yielded no results, but on the 5th or 6th evening, Mr. Vincey reported seeing, or imagining, an apparition of Mr. Bessel in his room. Though brief, the vision was vivid. He noted that Bessel looked pale, anxious, and disheveled. Caught off guard despite expecting something, Vincey didn't speak or move, and the figure glanced over its shoulder and vanished. They had planned to photograph any apparition, but Vincey, stunned, missed the chance to use the nearby camera. Though the moment passed, he was excited by the partial success, marked the time, and immediately went by cab to the Albany to inform Mr. Bessel. To his surprise, Bessel's outer door stood open, and inside the apartment was in chaos. A broken champagne magnum lay on the floor, its neck shattered against the bureau's ink pot. A small table was overturned, a bronze statuette and rare books scattered. Ink-smeared handprints defaced the primrose wallpaper. One chintz curtain had been ripped from its rings and thrown into the fire, the smell of smoldering fabrics filling the room. The entire room was bizarrely disordered. Vincey, expecting to find Bessel calmly waiting, was stunned by the destruction. With growing dread, he sought out the porter. "Where is Mr. Bessel?" he asked. "Did you know everything in his room is broken?" The porter, speechless at first, followed Vincey upstairs. "This confirms it," he said, observing the mess. "He's gone. He's mad." He then explained that about half an hour earlier, coinciding with the apparition, Mr. Bessel had rushed from the Albany into Vigo Street, disheveled and hatless, heading toward Bond Street. And as he passed, said the porter, he gave this weird, gasping laugh, with his mouth open, eyes glaring. It frightened me. He waved with his fingers clawed and said in a fierce whisper, "Life! Just that! Life!" "Dear me," said Vincent. "Tut, tut, dear me." He was too stunned to say anything else. He wandered between the porter and the room in bewilderment. He hoped Bessel would return and explain everything, but their conversation could go no further. "Could have been a sudden toothache," the porter offered. "Hit him hard, drove him wild. I've smashed things in pain before." He paused. "But why shout life at me?" Vincey had no answer. Mr. Bessel didn't return. After more useless staring and leaving a short inquiry note on the bureau, Vincey left, deeply shaken. He couldn't make sense of Bessel's behavior. He tried reading but couldn't concentrate. A walk nearly ended in an accident with a cab at Chancery Lane. Finally, an hour early, he went to bed. Sleep evaded him at first, due to the chaotic scene still fresh in his mind. When sleep came, it brought a disturbing dream of Bessel, wildly gesturing, pale, contorted. The dream conveyed intense fear and urgency. Vincey thought he heard Bessel's voice calling out in distress, an illusion, he told himself at the time. But the impression was vivid and lasting. He awoke, shaken, gripped by an unexplainable fear. Eventually, he dozed off again, only for the dream to return more intensely. When he woke again, he was utterly convinced Bessel was in grave danger. He couldn't rest. Despite logic arguing otherwise, he rose, lit the gas, dressed, and walked through empty streets, save for the occasional policeman and newspaper cart, towards Vigo Street to check on Bessel. But he never made it. While walking down Long Acre, he felt an urge to turn toward Covent Garden, where the market was coming to life, yellow lights and bustling shadows. He heard shouting, and suddenly a figure turned the hotel corner and ran at him. It was Bessel, but transformed. Hatless, shirt collar torn open, gripping a walking cane by the ferrule, face twisted. He ran quickly and powerfully. "Bessel!" Vinci shouted. But the man didn't react, didn't recognize him or respond to his name. Instead, he struck Vinci in the face with a stick, barely missing his eye. Vinci, stunned, fell hard on the pavement. Bessel, it seemed, leapt over him and disappeared. A policeman and several porters chased after him toward Long Acre. Passers-by helped Vinci to his feet, and soon a crowd formed. People assured him he was safe, then described what had happened. The man they believed Mad Bessel had appeared in the market screaming, "Life! Life!" while attacking people with the bloody cane, laughing wildly with every blow. A boy and 2 women had head injuries. A man's wrist was broken and a child knocked unconscious. He cleared the area, his frenzy unstoppable. Then he attacked a coffee stall, threw a paraffin lamp into a post office window, and fled after knocking out one of the 2 brave policemen who tried to stop him. Vinci wanted to help his friend to protect him from the mob's fury. But he was dazed, and before he could act, word spread through the crowd. Bessel had escaped. At first, Vinci couldn't believe it, but soon 2 weary, empty-handed policemen returned, confirming the story. After some aimless searching, Vinci headed back to Staple Inn, pressing a handkerchief to his aching nose, angry, confused, and utterly baffled. It seemed undeniable that Mr. Bessel had, transcript cuts off, certainly. Here's your provided text rewritten without adding any content. Violently mad in the midst of his experiment in thought transference. But why that should make him appear with a sad white face in Mr. Vinci's dream seemed a problem beyond solution. He racked his brains in vain to explain it. At last, it seemed to him that not simply Mr. Bessel, but the whole order of things must be insane. Yet he could think of nothing to do. He carefully shut himself into his room, lit his fire. It was a gas fire with asbestos bricks, and fearing fresh dreams if he went to bed, remained either bathing his injured face or holding up books in a vain attempt to read, until dawn. Throughout that vigil, he had a strange conviction that Mr. Bessel was attempting to speak to him, but he refused to yield to any such belief. About dawn, physical fatigue overcame him, and he went to bed and slept at last, though still disturbed by dreaming. He rose late, unrested, anxious, and in considerable pain. The morning papers had no mention of Mr. Bessel's aberration. It had occurred too late for them. Mr. Vinci's perplexities, intensified by the fever from his bruise, became intolerable, and after a fruitless visit to the Albany, he went down to St. Paul's churchyard to see Mr. Hart, Mr. Bessel's partner, and, as far as Mr. Vinci knew, his closest friend. He was surprised to find that Mr. Hart, although unaware of the outbreak, had also been disturbed by a vision, the very same vision Mr. Vinci had seen. Mr. Bessel, white and disheveled, pleading earnestly by his gestures for help. That was Mr. Hart's impression of the meaning of his signs. "I was just going to look him up in the Albany when you arrived," said Mr. Hart. "I was so sure something was wrong with him." As a result of their consultation, the 2 gentlemen decided to inquire at Scotland Yard for news of their missing friend. "He is bound to be laid by the heels," said Mr. Hart. "He can't go on at that pace for long." But the police had not laid Mr. Vinci's friend by the heels. They confirmed Mr. Vinci's experiences from the night before and added further details, some even more grave than he had known. A trail of smashed glass along the upper part of Tottenham Court Road, an attack on a policeman in Hampstead Road, and an atrocious assault on a woman. All of these outrages occurred between 12:30 and 1:45 in the morning. And from the very moment of Mr. Bessel's first dash from his rooms at 9:30, the authorities could trace the escalating violence of his wild course through the city. For the last hour, at least from before 1 o'clock until 1:45, he had run amok through London, eluding every effort to stop or capture him with astonishing agility. But after 1:45, he vanished. Up to that point, the witnesses were numerous. Dozens of people had seen him, fled from him, or pursued him, and then suddenly, everything stopped. At 1:45, he had been seen running down Euston Road toward Baker Street, flourishing a can of burning colza oil and splashing flames at the windows of houses as he passed. But no policeman on Euston Road beyond the waxwork exhibition, nor any in the side streets he would have had to take to leave the road, had seen anything of him. He had vanished abruptly. Nothing further came to light despite intense investigation. This was a fresh shock for Mr. Vincey. He had taken comfort in Mr. Hart's assurance he is bound to be laid by the heels before long, and had been able to suspend his mental anxiety on that basis. But every new development only added further impossibilities to a heap already beyond what he could rationally accept. He even found himself questioning whether his own memory had deceived him, wondering if any of these events could truly have happened. That afternoon, he sought out Mr. Hart again to share the overwhelming burden on his mind. He found Mr. Hart engaged with a well-known private detective, but as that gentleman achieved nothing in the case, there is no need to detail his actions. All that day, Mr. Bessel's whereabouts evaded even the most active search, and the night as well. And all that day, Mr. Vincey had a sense at the back of his mind that Mr. Bessel was seeking his attention, and all through the night, Mr. Bessel, with a tear-streaked face full of anguish, pursued him in his dreams. Whenever he saw Mr. Bessel in his dreams, he also saw a number of other faces, vague but malevolent, pursuing Mr. Bessel. It was on the following day, Sunday, that Mr. Vincey recalled certain strange stories about Mrs. Bullock, the medium, who was at that time gaining attention in London. He decided to consult her. She was staying at the house of the well-known investigator, Dr. Wilson Paget, and Mr. Let me know when you're ready for the next part. Certainly. Here's your provided text rewritten in English without adding any content. Vincey, although he had never met that gentleman before, went to him at once with the intention of seeking her help. But he had barely mentioned the name of Bessel when Dr. Paget interrupted him. Last night, just at the end, he said, we had a communication. He left the room and returned with a slate upon which were certain words written in a handwriting, shaky indeed, but unmistakably the handwriting of Mr. Bessel. How did you get this? Asked Mr. Vincey. Do you mean? We got it last night, said Dr. Paget. With frequent interruptions from Mr. Vincey, he proceeded to explain how the writing had been obtained. It appears that during her seances, Mrs. Bullock enters a state of trance, her eyes rolling strangely under her eyelids and her body becoming rigid. She then begins to speak rapidly, usually in voices not her own. At the same time, one or both of her hands may become active, and if slates and pencils are provided, they will write messages simultaneously and quite independently of the speech flowing from her mouth. Many consider her an even more remarkable medium than the famous Mrs. Piper. It was one of these messages, written by her left hand, that now lay before Mr. Vincey. It consisted of 8 disjointed words: George Bessel, trial extreme, help, starvation. Curiously, neither Dr. Paget nor the 2 other investigators present had heard of Mr. Bessel's disappearance. The news had only appeared in Saturday evening's papers, and they had set the message aside with many others of the vague and puzzling type that Mrs. Bullock often produced. When Dr. Paget heard Mr. Vincey's story, he immediately threw himself into pursuing the clue to find Mr. Bessel. It serves no useful purpose here to describe the inquiries of Mr. Vincey and himself. It is enough that the clue proved genuine, and that Mr. Bessel was in fact found through its aid. He was discovered at the bottom of an isolated shaft, which had been sunk and later abandoned during the early stages of work on the new electric railway near Baker Street Station. His arm, leg, and 2 ribs were broken. The shaft is enclosed by a hoarding nearly 20 feet high, and over this, incredible as it seems, Mr. Bessel, a stout, middle-aged man, must have climbed to fall into the shaft. He was soaked in colza oil, and the smashed tin was beside him, but luckily the flame had been extinguished in the fall. His madness had entirely passed, but he was, of course, terribly weakened, and at the sight of his rescuers, he broke down in hysterical weeping. In view of the dreadful condition of his apartment, he was taken to the house of Dr. Hatton in Upper Baker Street. There he was treated with sedatives, and all things that might recall the violent crisis he had endured were carefully avoided. But on the second day, he volunteered a statement. Since then, Mr. Bessel has repeated this statement several times, to myself among others, varying some details as real-life narrators do, but never contradicting himself in any particular. And the essence of his account is this: To understand it properly, one must return to the experiments he had conducted with Mr. Vinci before the extraordinary incident. Mr. Bessel's first attempts at self-projection in his sessions with Mr. Vinci were, as the reader will recall, unsuccessful. But throughout, he concentrated his whole power and will on escaping his body, willing it with all my might, he says. At last, almost unexpectedly, success came, and Mr. Bessel maintains that he, while alive, did actually by force of will leave his body and pass into some place or state beyond this world. The release, he says, was instantaneous. One moment I was sitting in my chair, my eyes tightly shut, hands gripping the arms of the chair, doing all I could to fix my mind on Vinci, and then I saw myself outside my body, saw my body nearby, clearly no longer containing me, the hands loosening, the head falling forward. Nothing shakes his certainty of that release. He describes calmly and matter-of-factly the new sensation he felt. He had become intangible, as he had expected, but he had not anticipated that he would become so immensely large. Yet that, it seems, he did. I was a great cloud, if I may put it that way, anchored to my body. It seemed at first that I had discovered a greater self, of which the conscious being in my brain was only a small part. I saw the Albany, Piccadilly, Regent Street, and all the rooms and spaces in the houses, very small, very bright, and very distinct, spread out beneath me like a miniature city seen from a balloon. Now and then, drifting smoke-like forms would blur the vision slightly, but at first I paid them little attention. What astonished me most, and still does, was that I could see clearly the interiors of houses as well as the streets, saw little people dining and talking in the private homes, men and women dining, playing billiards. Ready for the next part whenever you are. And drinking in restaurants and hotels, and several places of entertainment crammed with people. It was like watching the affairs of a glass hive. Such were Mr. Bessel's exact words as I took them down when he told me the story. Quite forgetful of Mr. Vinci, he remained for a space observing these things. Impelled by curiosity, he says, he stooped down, and with the shadowy arm he found himself possessed of, attempted to touch a man walking along Vigo Street. But he could not do so, though his fingers seemed to pass through the man. Something prevented his doing this, but what it was, he finds it hard to describe. He compares the obstacle to a sheet of glass. I felt as a kitten may feel, he said, when it goes for the first time to pat its reflection in a mirror. Again and again, on the occasion when I heard him tell this story, Mr. Bessel returned to that comparison of the sheet of glass. Yet it was not altogether a precise comparison, because as the reader will speedily see, there were interruptions of this generally impermeable resistance, means of getting through the barrier to the material world again. But naturally, there is a very great difficulty in expressing these unprecedented impressions in the language of everyday experience. A thing that impressed him instantly, and which weighed upon him throughout all this experience, was the stillness of this place. He was in a world without sound. At first, Mr. Bessel's mental state was an unemotional wonder. His thought chiefly concerned itself with where he might be. He was out of the body, out of his material body at any rate. But that was not all. He believes, and I for one believe also, that he was somewhere out of space, as we understand it, altogether. By a strenuous effort of will, he had passed out of his body into a world beyond this world, a world undreamt of, yet lying so close to it and so strangely situated with regard to it, that all things on this earth are clearly visible both from without and from within in this other world about us. For a long time, as it seemed to him, this realization occupied his mind to the exclusion of all other matters, and then he recalled the engagement with Mr. Vinci, to which this astonishing experience was, after all, but a prelude. He turned his mind to locomotion in this new body in which he found himself. For a time, he was unable to shift himself from his attachment to his earthly carcass. For a time, this new strange cloud body of his simply swayed, contracted, expanded, coiled, and writhed with his efforts to free himself. And then, quite suddenly, the link that bound him snapped. For a moment, everything was hidden by what appeared to be whirling spheres of dark vapor. And then, through a momentary gap, he saw his drooping body collapse limply, saw his lifeless head drop sideways, and found he was driving along like a huge cloud in a strange place of shadowy clouds that had the luminous intricacy of London spread like a model below. But now he was aware that the fluctuating vapor about him was something more than vapor, and the temerarious excitement of his first essay was shot with fear, for he perceived at first indistinctly, and then suddenly very clearly, that he was surrounded by faces, that each roll and coil of the seeming cloud stuff was a face, and such faces, faces of thin shadow, faces of gaseous tenuity, faces like those faces that glare with intolerable strangeness upon the sleeper in the evil hours of his dreams. Evil, greedy eyes that were full of a covetous curiosity, faces with knit brows and snarling, smiling lips, their vague hands clutched at Mr. Bessel as he passed, and the rest of their bodies was but an elusive streak of trailing darkness. Never a word they said, never a sound from the mouths that seemed to gibber. All about him they pressed in that dreamy silence, passing freely through the dim mistiness that was his body, gathering ever more numerously about him. And the shadowy Mr. Bessel, now suddenly fear-stricken, drove through the silent, active multitude of eyes and clutching hands. So inhuman were these faces, so malignant their staring eyes and shadowy, clawing gestures, that it did not occur to Mr. Bessel to attempt intercourse with these drifting creatures. Idiot phantoms they seemed, children of vain desire, beings unborn and forbidden the boon of being, whose only expressions and gestures told of the envy and craving for life that was their one link with existence. It says much for his resolution that amidst the swarming cloud of his noiseless spirits of evil, he could still think of Mr. Vincey. He made a violent effort of will and found himself, he knew not how, stooping toward Staple Inn, saw Vincey sitting attentive and alert in his armchair by the fire. And clustering also about him, as they clustered ever about all that lives and breathes, was another multitude of these vain, voiceless shadows, longing, desiring, seeking some loophole into life. For a space Mr. Bessel sought ineffectually to attract his friend's attention. He tried to get in front of his eyes, to move the objects in his room, to touch him. But Mr. Vincey remained unaffected, ignorant of the being that was so close to his own. The strange something that Mr. Bessel has compared to a sheet of glass separated them impermeably. 29:22. And at last Mr. Bessel did a desperate thing. I have told how that in some strange way he could see not only the outside of a man as we see him, but within. He extended his shadowy hand and thrust his vague black fingers as it seemed through the heedless brain. Then suddenly, Mr. Vincey started like a man who recalls his attention from wandering thoughts, and it seemed to Mr. Bessel that a little dark red body situated in the middle of Mr. Vincey's brain swelled and glowed as he did so. Since that experience, he has been shown anatomical figures of the brain, and he knows now that this is that useless structure, as doctors call it, the pineal eye. For strange as it will seem to many, we have deep in our brains, where it cannot possibly see any earthly light, an eye. At the time this, with the rest of the internal anatomy of the brain, was quite new to him. At the sight of its changed appearance, however, he thrust forth his finger, and rather fearful still of the consequences, touched this little spot. And instantly Mr. Vincey started, and Mr. Bessel knew that he was seen. And at that instant it came to Mr. Bessel that evil had happened to his body, and behold, a great wind blew through all that world of shadows and tore him away. So strong was this persuasion that he thought no more of Mr. Vincey, but turned about forthwith, and all the countless faces drove back with him like leaves before a gale. But he returned too late. In an instant he saw the body that he had left inert and collapsed, lying, indeed, like the body of a man just dead, had arisen by virtue of some strength and will beyond his own. It stood with staring eyes, stretching its limbs in dubious fashion. For a moment he watched it in wild dismay, and then he stooped towards it. But the pane of glass had closed against him again, and he was foiled. He beat himself passionately against this, and all about him the spirits of evil grinned and pointed and mocked. He gave way to furious anger. He compares himself to a bird that has fluttered heedlessly into a room and is beating at the window pane that holds it back from freedom. And behold, the little body that had once been his was now dancing with delight. He saw it shouting, though he could not hear its shouts. He saw the violence of its movements grow. He watched it fling his cherished furniture about in the mad delight of existence, rend his books apart, smash bottles, drink heedlessly from the jagged fragments, leap and smite in a passionate acceptance of living. He watched these actions in paralyzed astonishment. Then once more he hurled himself against the impassable barrier, and then with all that crew of